Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Today's call is a second presentation and a Q&A session around Battlebank. Hopefully, most of you attended our session earlier in the week where we talked about various aspects of Battlebank, but particularly the, we hope, impending start of business. We're going to do a few things today in addition to answering questions. Frank Trotter is going to give you a very brief overview of Battlebank for those of you who weren't able to attend the first session. I am going to talk about the economics of banking from the point of view of being a bank industry investor. And then Frank is going to give you a couple tips about being a bank customer. He's been a banker for 30, 35 years. He knows what bankers do right. He knows what bankers do wrong. He knows how you can participate in the banking process to maximize your benefit around banking. And then we're going to go into questions and answers. This call will be of particular interest to four constituencies, some of whom will be interrelated. The call will be of interest to people who deposit with banks. Battlebank's deposit products will be different from many other banks and offer a variety of custom choices not generally available at other banks. Our bank will also be of interest to self-actualized investors who want to control their own IRA rather than having an IRA which is merely a receptacle for Wall Street products. And we'll talk about, or rather Frank will talk about, the checkbook IRA products of Battlebank. And we are also, I suspect, going to be the lender of choice to precious metals holders, people who own physical gold, silver, platinum, and palladium, and want access to the capital that they have tied up in those sectors without selling the material and paying the capital gains tax. Finally, of course, as Battlebank is about to go live and anticipating, we think, very, very rapid deposit growth, we want to talk to that class of people who would like to invest in a bank that services those constituencies, the depositors, the self-actualized IRA investors, and borrowers for all purposes, but particularly precious metals. So we will have a section on investing in Battlebank. Notice that this offering is made only by prospectus, so the discussion today is for informational purposes. You can get more information off the website, battlebank.com, and Frank will tell you more about that. Frank, first of all, welcome. I'm delighted to have you with us.
Delighted to be here. I'm coming to you from our Edwards headquarters. It's a beautiful day out here in the mountains, and looking forward to having a conversation.
I want you to briefly introduce yourself again, your career in banking, opening the predecessor bank, EverBank, that sort of thing. Let people know who will be telling them about how to be a bank customer and how to do business with Battlebank.
Well, been in banking since shortly before the Dead Sea became sick, starting way back when in the early 1980s at Mark Twain Banks, a very entrepreneurial institutions out of St. Louis. Did commercial lending, moved over to the investment group, the bond and fixed income trading, and then created something called the World Currency Deposits, where people could diversify into currencies they could deal in precious metals. And we distributed that instead of through our Missouri footprint, but we did that nationwide. And we started to learn a little bit about being a nationwide institution at that time. In the mid to late 1990s, Mark Twain Banks was sold. It was gobbled up by one of the big banks, ultimately becoming U.S. Bank, and left that institution to work with a few folks to found something called EverBank. It was at the late 1990s. We looked out, saw that banks were paying low rates, charging high fees, and at that time, there were still big teller lines looking out the door. And we felt that we could reach out directly to clients nationwide and became one of the first online banks. Sort of to put a number on this was 8 years before the iPhone. So it was pretty early in this direct banking world. People really hadn't gotten into that. And at EverBank, we grew that institution very well over the next 17 years. to $28 billion, a very large institution at that time, about 275,000 happy clients across a variety of product sets. So we have an extremely experienced team. And when we started to talk about, I retired literally coming up this week. We'll have family in town for the GoPro games here in Vail this weekend. And I was literally in the water in a whitewater raft race as the wire came in from TIAA as we sold Everbank. And my wife looked over and somebody says, "What does that do to his life insurance?" At that time, I retired, which I promptly flunked. Rick and I started talking about Battlebank, and that's what our topic is today.
Thank you for that, Frank. I think what I'd like to do is I'm going to talk a little bit about what I threatened to talk about earlier in the week, which is the economics of banking. And then I'd like you to talk about briefly the economics of being a bank client. You've been a banker for a long time, and you know some of the things that banking clients can do to defend themselves from or profit from their relationship with the institution. So after I'm done talking about banking in general, I want you to talk about banking in particular, if you're happy to do that. And I'm going to be brief with the economics of banking. Let me just say that I've been a bank investor now for 45 years, and it's an extremely good business. Most of my banking investment career has been in community banks. And I would argue that Battlebank is a community bank where community is defined as shared interests as opposed to geographic locale. Banks do better when they're focused on something. They do better when they understand a market and serve that market and don't try to be all things to all people. It's important to note that not all banks are created equal, not all banks service or perform equally. Banks do better when they're focused. So let's talk about the economics of banking. First of all, the deposit side. It's important to note that domestic banks receive a tremendous indirect incentive from the federal government in the form of FDIC insurance. When you deposit money with Battlebank, you aren't actually necessarily just lending money to Battlebank. You're inadvertently lending money to the US government, or at least benefiting from the guarantee of the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation on the first $250,000 of your deposit. What that means for you is some certainty. What it means for the bank is a lower cost of funds than they would otherwise enjoy. That credit spread, the ability to accept deposits or borrow at a lower interest rate than is available to non-banking institutions, individuals, companies, stuff like that. That's in effect a credit spread, and the bank's credit is subsidized indirectly by you, the taxpayer, by the federal government. And the spread between our cost of funds and what we receive for funds, the interest that we receive on the money we lend, is the basis of banking. It's important to note, too, that because we have access to subsidized credit, we can employ relatively high leverage in the business. The FDIC considers a well-capitalized bank to be a bank with equity at least 7% of total assets. Both Frank and I, by the way, as a consequence of years of investing in banking, prefer somewhat less leverage. This equity really is meant to be a buffer between the money that we owe depositors and the money that our borrowers borrow from us. That is, if you will, the equity in the bank, and the equity in the bank is meant to be a buffer, or in effect, an indirect form of insurance between our assets and our liabilities. A couple things to know about this. Non-interest expense is a critical component. In other words, if you're living off the spread, you don't want to eat up too much of the spread by non-interest expenses, things like branches or exorbitant salaries. The second thing that you don't want to do is expose yourself to too many loan losses. One bad loan obviates the economic benefit from 8 or 10 good loans. What that means in terms of the economics of banking is that bankers who focus on certain industries where they understand the valuations, they understand how to underwrite loans, they understand the credit of the borrowers, and they understand the borrowers of themselves, those banks do better than the generalist banks that try to invest in 200 or 300 industries where they can't possibly know all of those industries well. Remember, we live on the spread. The fewer loan losses we experience, the better we're able to amortize that credit spread over a larger asset base. Again, the lower the non-interest expense, the more money is left over in the spread between what we pay for our funds and what we lend our funds out for. And the third competitive advantage that I look for as a banking investor, and I'm delighted to say has been engineered into Battlebank, has been low customer acquisition costs. Uh, Large banks in particular, that get their customers through very expensive, non-specific and non-performance based advertising, have high customer acquisition costs. Banks that focus on certain communities where they have access to a customer base in non-traditional measures have a low customer acquisition cost. In our current bank, Battlebank, even before we open, we have a 17,000 person waiting list. And that waiting list accrued to us as a consequence of, first of all, disaffected former customers at Everbank who basically follow the management, and people who pay attention to my podcast, broadcast, things like that. People that we were already familiar with. This is an example of affinity or community marketing affecting low customer acquisition costs. So remember, in summary, we enjoy lower than average cost of funds because of the federal guarantee. That gives us the spread. The spread can be whittled away by high customer acquisition cost, by poor underwriting, and by large non-interest expense. The other way that it can go away, and this is very important for everybody on the call to recognize, is what's called a time spread. What brought down the US savings and loan industry and what brought down Silicon Valley Bank was the fact that they had long-term fixed price assets on their balance sheet, which were funded by short-term variable rate deposits. When the interest rate went up, the capitalized value of their long-term obligations went down at the same time that their carrying costs went up. This time spread is a killer. Banks that are funded in short-term variable rate deposits need to make short-term variable rate loans. Having a time spread is something that can kill the margin faster than any other single variable. This conspires to make high quality banks extremely good investments. The ability to maintain decent credit spreads with low customer acquisition costs means that banking is one of those businesses that meets the Buffett or Munger test, which is to say a business that can earn 15, 16, 17% returns on capital employed and reinvest the surplus at the same rates of capital employed to grow tangible book meaningfully over long periods of time. I have experienced that myself as a bank investor. I've had the advantage of being able to invest in banks that try to do a couple things well, succeeded, and reinvested above average rates of return at above average rates of return for extended periods of time. An awful lot of fun, and something that we hope to do with Battlebank. So that is, in very brief form, the economics of banking. I'm sure there'll be questions about that, which I'm happy to answer at the end. Frank, over to you. Talk about something about being a bank customer.
Well, I think, first up, Rick mentioned that we're building Battlebank to serve a common interest. And I think that's something you need to look at any financial institution you're doing business with. If the bank that you're banking with doesn't have an interest in answering your questions, providing products and services that are of interest to you, then it's not the right place to be. And we find that, like a lot of things, people bank where their parents or their grandparents banked and don't pay any attention to value, to product structure, to fees, or anything else. It's just a utility to many folks. I mean, I get on the phone with people all day, every day, and sometimes they'll say, well, where do you bank now? And they'll say, well, one of the big banks, JP Morgan Chase or Citibank, US Bank, Bank of America, Wells Fargo, and so on. And then we sort of lay out the value proposition at each of these institutions, and they go, And even all the way back when we formed Everbank, I was talking to a friend who ultimately became an investor, mostly because of this moment, is we outlined what we were going to pay. on, at that time, checking accounts, much like our high yield cash account will be here at Battlebank. He called his representative and said, I have $650,000 in my checking account. What are you paying me? The representative didn't give the number. She simply said, well, perhaps we could switch you to another account. So one of the key things to look for in a bank is do not ever stop paying attention. Match yourself with products and services that have a high value, a low fee structure, and meet what you are personally doing in the market, not just because they have a branch in your neighborhood, not because they sponsor your local sports team, not because your parents bank there and they just happen to open an account when you were 18. But focus on that. Certainly there are a lot of little digs and tricks, and like any business, there are fees for many services that you probably don't want to end up paying. Take a look at those fee structures before you move on with your bank or ask them to do something in particular. And you'll be surprised. Those disclosures by regulation and by ethics are right there online. You can read them and understand them and not be trapped by them. So starting out, of course, with the deposit money, make sure you're getting a great yield, market yield on all your deposits, including your checking accounts. At Battlebank, our high yield cash account, for example, will pay a high money market style rate of interest, but it's a full checking account. Keywords there. Today, maybe that's 360, maybe 370. We haven't sat down with the ALCO committee, but compare that with an average checking rate in the U.S. today of 0.05%. And some of those checking accounts carry fees of $15, $20, $25 a month. Two, what do you think about branches? Do you really need them? When was the last time you went in? Everything that can be done today can be done on the phone or on your desktop or calling somebody on the phone. On the lending side, make sure that when you need liquidity, that liquidity is available. Maybe you need a mortgage loan. Maybe you do invest in gold or silver or platinum and palladium, and you want to hold on to that. You want to maintain liquidity. Those are some of the things that you should start to look at. And I think one other thing at a bank or a broker dealer, when you talk about retirement accounts, is, as Rick said earlier, the Wall Street and the financial supermarkets just want you to consume their products. That may be fine to have a few stocks and bonds and mutual funds, but there are a lot of other things that are eligible in an IRA. In IRS speak, that is not ineligible. You may need to do income producing properties that you want to manage and earn the income and the appreciation on. Perhaps it's hard money loans, private equity investments, maybe crypto. There are a lot of different things that you can do in an IRA. And of course, at Battlebank, we'll be offering checkbook IRAs to let you take back control of your own retirement account. And then finally, as a community that is very focused on precious metals, foreign currencies, and other things, a lot of people want to hold on to their gold, silver, platinum, or palladium. And we feel that being able to maintain liquidity on those items is important. Somebody here in the stream asked, how if I want to borrow on it? Initially, let's say if you have $100,000 in one of the metals, we'll advance 50% of that. There will be a margin call at 75% to ask you to bring it back to 70% advance. And at 90%, that's it. That hasn't happened, by the way, in over 25 years. But you have to have that in mind if you do have that lending against it. So some of the things just to watch out for in a bank: make sure you're getting value, make sure you're getting yield, watch the fees, and make sure the community of that bank, whether it's local or nationwide, is what really speaks to you.
Frank, we defined Battlebank as a community bank. And what I would like you to do very briefly, because I want to get to questions, is talk about who that community is, who we serve, why we're in place to serve them, that type of thing.
Sounds great. You and I have been in this community now for more years than we're willing to count on this live stream. I'm certainly over 40 years. I believe you're over 45 years dealing with folks that are interested in many things that are outside the mainstream. Let's sort of define that as a community that is focused on independent financial research. Yeah, perhaps they take the journal, perhaps they take a broker-dealer's weekly or daily update, but what they're really looking for is something different, an independent financial researcher, such as Rural Investment Media. A lot of those are coming together, by the way, at the Rural Investment Symposium in Boca Raton in July, and it's something worthwhile stopping by. But another thing that defines this community is an interest in alternative assets, precious metals. I think the latest statistic that I've heard you quote is less than 2% of personal assets are in precious metals these days. Perhaps a high of 5% at one point in time, but part of that's just because of the stock market appreciation. But I think this is a cornerstone of a protection against inflation and a protection against asset depreciation in other areas. Another thing people are looking to do is have a wider view of the world. Not every currency is called the US dollar. And we provide over 18 different currencies for you to diversify your portfolio into. And this community is interested in these elements. This community is interested in holding their precious metals, but maybe they need to put a deck on the back of the house. Maybe they need to make another investment. Maybe they want to buy more precious metals. So we provide that liquidity to those individuals. So bottom line is you and I have been in this group, this broad community for many, many years. We want to serve the community. We believe we have designed Battlebank to serve this community of like-minded individuals.
Frank, before we go on, I'd be remiss in saying that one of my visions for the bank is for the bank to be owned by the community. I want the bank to be owned by its employees, its depositors, its borrowers. Part of what we want to talk about today is the fact that we are looking for growth capital. We mentioned at the beginning of the broadcast that a well-capitalized bank has assets at 7% of total equity. I personally prefer a little bit higher number. But suffice it to say, I believe with 17,000 people on the waiting list that our deposit growth is going to be explosive, truly explosive. I believe, too, that there is an enormous unmet need in the United States for credit facilities around precious metals. That means that in order to grow, we're going to need capital. If there are people on this call who are interested in a business that takes advantage of the economics of banking that I've described, and who understand the competitive advantage that beginning life with 17,000 aspiring high net worth customers, that requires capital in order to enjoy this leverage, in order to enjoy the federal deposit insurance, in order to enjoy the spread between our cost of funds and our return on capital employed. That takes capital. If there are people on this call who intend to become customers of the bank and are accredited and would like, in addition to being customers of the bank, to be owners of the bank, while we can discuss this offer is made only, this discussion is for information purposes, and there's a lot more information available at the website. Frank, if you have anything to add to that, I'm happy to hear it.
We're very pleased with the number of people who have joined the battle over the last year, but we're really hoping that more and more individuals want to be both investors in Battle Financial, which is building Battlebank, as well as clients. Now, you mentioned the wait list, and that's going to be the way you can become a client. So if anybody on this call is not on the wait list, please go to battlebank.com and join the wait list. Number two, if you're an accredited investor and this is something for which you feel you have the risk parameters to invest in, and you can go to battlebank.com/invest. That was up here at the bottom of the screen right now. Take a look at the offering memorandum and all the associated exhibits. Make sure you understand it. And we would love to have you join the battle as an investor. Briefly, these notes will convert very close to the time that we complete our acquisition of Stearns Bank of ABSol in Upsala, Minnesota. So there is some urgency to this in that could occur once we have Fed and OCC approval. Nobody knows the mind of the regulators, but we're hoping that that's right around the corner. So I think we would love to, Rick and I would love to speak with anyone who is interested in this investment. Certainly I'm an investor. Rick is a significant investor, and you can read all about that in the offering memorandum. So love to have the conversation. We would hope that you would consider being an investor if you're an accredited investor and you read the offering memorandum and consider it carefully.
Albert, I think with that, we should open the question and answer session. Can Canadians open an account at Battlebank, Frank?
Yes, they can. We have built this for our North American friends in the US and in Canada.
Always getting screwed on conversion to and from Canadian dollars. Would love to see good rates on that. Can you talk about conversion provided that a customer is banking in US and Canadian dollars?
Absolutely. We'll have a pledge on the website, which we have followed for many years at Everbank and at Mark Twain Banks, that our conversion rates are approximately 0.75% from your first Canadian or US dollar upward. Of course, if you're doing multi-million-dollar trades, you can call the desk and we can talk about it. But you'll be able to go onto your account online. If you have Canadian dollars, just wire them in. If you have US dollars, you can get them to us any one of a number of different ways. And you can make that conversion online. You'll see the price. You can say yes or no, and that will be available to you in the normal settlement period.
It's important to note that that's about a third of the competing rate offered by Canadian banks. Because of your expertise in mining, will Battlebank have a focus on loans and or royalty purchases to miners? I think all deal with that. I think initially the lending product of Battlebank, the most important lending product, will be against physical precious metals. But I also think it's highly likely that as the size of the bank increases, and I think that'll happen fairly rapidly, that we will look at providing corporate financial services, which is to say loans to the mining, the oil and gas, and the royalty and streaming business. That's the business that I have long familiarity with, a lot of underwriting expertise in, and it's really, really, really underserved by the market. Despite the fact it's a very good business, the big banks are retreating from that business, and we would love to fill that void. What is the checkbook IRA management fee going to be, Frank?
I'll have to get back to you on it. I don't know that at the top of my head. There are a number of providers out there that are trust companies that charge quite a hefty fee for something similar. I know we are well inside that, but let us come back to you on that. If you don't mind, just sending us an email at info@battlebank.com.
If I have silver at home, can I deposit it in your bank? How much will I need to pay for the storage?
You will certainly be able to move your silver, gold, platinum, or palladium to our storage facilities at Brinks. We'll be able to provide you with instructions. Upon acceptance and assay, it can be placed in storage. Our storage fees are not finalized, but we expect them to be under 1% per annum, and certainly well inside the market that you know and love from other dealers.
I think it's important to note, too, that we will have lending agreements with various dealers. And so if your metal is on deposit at a dealer that we have a relationship with, your relationship with your dealer, provided that you like your dealer, can remain intact. You don't have to store the physical precious metals with us. We will have lending arrangements with various dealers. If you don't have a dealer, if that silver is stored at home, we would love to compete for your business. Curious as to the know your client requirements. Is this bank, is it a U.S. bank or a Canadian bank?
This is a U.S. bank, will be federally chartered, an OCC supervised national bank. So all the KYC requirements will be those that are held here in the United States.
Hi, if an accredited investor invests in Battlebank, when can they expect to receive their investment back? Is it 10 years or 20 years? What is the expected time frame?
It's a great question. We think we should be able to get to what's called scale in banking. Obviously, we're starting at zero here in the 3 to 5 year area. And at that point, the board, the shareholders, will take a look and see what's out there in the market. We may continue to be a bank if we're successful, we would have a philosophy that dividends are a good thing. We could recapitalize with private equity. We could go public. It would be an unfortunate day for my position, but of course it provides liquidity to shareholders. Or I suppose we could sell it. Those decisions are down the road, and I think we're having trouble these days seeing what the world looks like in 5 days, let alone 5 years. So that really is dependent on how the market is at that time, but we'll be open for anything.
I'd like to add to that. I look at this myself, and I'm a large investor. I look at this as a business that can generate between 15 and 20% return on capital employed, and can reinvest that money at the same multiple. If you are able to do that for 5 years, you are paid a very high premium based on the track record. In other words, your ability to generate above average rates of return attracts an above average multiple. I personally don't know what the exit is, and I personally don't care. In my life, good exits have been a function of good entries. If you are looking for 1 year or 2 years liquidity, which is to say, if you're a trader, don't do this deal. If you would like to be part of an institution that can generate high internal rates of return by serving a specific audience better and more efficiently than the competition, do. Next question. How, as a customer, should we evaluate the strength of our own bank? We have an account at Space Coast Credit Union. Use EverBank for the interest and look forward to transferring to Battle. I might say that all depository institutions are required to produce for you on request a statement of financial condition. I would look at a few things there. The character and composition of their assets. Many banks right now, Bank of America as an example, have a high proportion of loans, quote, or bonds, quote, investments held to maturity. What that often means is that they're upside down. They can't mark them at market. And so there's a lot of sin hidden on bank balance sheets. Certainly banks that fail to meet the capital adequacy test, which is to say equity at 7% of total assets, are banks that you should be suspect of. Frank, any additions?
No, I think, looking at capital, you can look at the FDIC publishes quarterly numbers on every bank, which reports to it. And there's something called ibanknet.com that does detailed financial analysis, or provides you with the numbers for you to do detailed financial analysis on a bank.
Please define accredited investor. Maybe I'll take this. Somebody who self-identifies as having reasonable investment knowledge and has a portfolio net worth exclusive of home furnishings and fixtures exceeding $1 million US. What size of loans do you envision? I think that'll be a function of the size of the bank over time, but I'll let and also, of course, the collateral. But I'll let Frank answer the question.
I think, right out of the gate, we'll start with $100,000 in collateral, a $50,000 advance, and a $75,000 line. As we move forward and have this fully automated, that will come down. And we certainly anticipate having people with significant holdings borrowing here. We've already had a queue of inquiries in some very large transactions as well.
Yeah, I should note that we have an inquiry that I'm aware of, a $12 million inquiry around precious metals.
Great.
And to the extent that we receive originate very large loans, we can also syndicate some portion of those loans out to other lenders. What is the projected lending rate for loans secured by U.S. Silver Eagles, bullion coins?
Right now, and I think you probably know that to the extent that you can have anybody loan you money in this market, it's in the sort of the mid-teens right now. We'll be at 2.5 over prime initially.
With the exception that very large loans are negotiable.
Of course.
No one alive today managed to bank through the Great Depression. Assuming we face something similar, what will your bank do to survive? How to survive the unforeseen macroeconomic problems? Perhaps, Frank, you could describe the experience of EverBank during the 2008 banking crisis. Admittedly, that wasn't of the same duration as the Depression. But talk about prudence in banking and survivability.
Well, I think, Rick talked about our lending philosophy up front. And that's the number one element. Banks that do not survive a severe downturn or a depression are often the ones that didn't pay attention on the way in. Not having, time spreads, not having bad credit decisions, not getting into credit markets that you don't know anything about. In the 2008 to 2010 range, Everbank, through great attention paid by its risk management, its credit management, and other policy sets, did very well. Certainly, we lost some money on some real estate deals. Everybody did. But we did not take TARP, and we actually were able to acquire a failed bank in this process. And you are not allowed to do that unless you're a bank in good standing. There is certainly no way to predict every problem in the world, but if you pay attention on the way in, you are much better served on the way along.
Solvent banks do better than less solvent banks in bad times. One of the things that really excites me about Battlebank right now is when I look at the balance sheets of some of the competing institutions, I see them actually having lending constraints going forward. This sounds very rude, but competing against a crippled opponent in a marathon is something that I look forward to doing. The current malaise in banking, the unknown sins that have accrued in the 1982 to 2022 epoch, competing against institutions that are managing thus far to hide some of those sins, but who will be constrained going forward is something that I very much look forward to doing.
And one thing, we do actually have, I wasn't alive during the Depression, although some people might think so. Our family did have a bank in the 30s, and the way they handled it is we paid off all of the depositors, period, and moved forward. That is, I think, the right way to do it if you have the capability. And it's what a lot of the banks didn't do. They just went bust. The depositors' money was set aside, and can't predict it from past performance is no guarantee of future performance. But philosophically, I think that was a good answer during the Depression.
Had gold ownership been legalized in the Great Depression, and had there been a bank that lent against gold, that would have been an extremely happy group of shareholders. The next question, will Miles Franklin be one of your dealers? I'm delighted to say that Miles Franklin signed the first dealer agreement we had. And so, yes, Miles Franklin will be a Battlebank approved dealer. As a proud investor, where do I get merchandise? Where do I get my Battlebank swag? Helps reduce customer acquisition cost. Thank you. Frank, how do we distribute shirts and hats?
Well, once we open the doors, I think we'll be carpet bombing the shareholders with swag. You can see Rick and I are the proud owners of the only two Oxfords known to Battlebank. And we understand and agree that having the hat, which I have sitting over here, having the shirt, having the sports shirt, having the T-shirt, and all the orange pens that you may see at the Rural Investment Media Conference in July are important elements. We all joke, I used to occasionally at a former institution take a handful of pens to a restaurant, take whatever pens were in their signing cup and put mine in there. So maybe some of our shareholders will take that guerrilla approach as well.
Minimum equity investment.
$75,000.
Is there any benefit to deposit precious metals directly at the Stearns location in Uppsala?
No.
Please don't.
The folks at ABSol, at least initially, won't know what to do with that. No, we will provide you with instructions and a secure way to move them to Brake's appropriate facility nearest to you.
I think our 8 deposit boxes in Uppsala are already occupied.
We do have safe deposit boxes there if you want to buy one.
Hello, Frank. Will there be international transaction fees while using a debit card internationally? Will Battlebank ATM fees be rebated like Schwab? Thank you.
Battlebank ATM fees will be rebated like Everbank. I don't know what Schwab does exactly. And my experience with our rebates internationally, and I have had the good fortune to travel internationally a lot, is that those are rebated. Sometimes that's a country by country rule, but wherever we can, we will.
Will you do fractional reserve lending? Yes.
Yes.
The nature of a business that has equity as 8 or 9% of total assets is that it is a fractional reserve institution. Will Battlebank participate in derivatives? I have read that that FDIC is underfunded at 9 times the liability. Please advise.
Yeah, we will use derivatives to hedge our portfolios. For example, our foreign currency deposits, possibly some of our mortgage loans. But we do not in any way, shape, or form take a trading interest in derivatives. That is where we feel the risk is in the market. And I think if you look at some of the numbers, they can be pretty shocking. I shared some of those at a Rule Investment Symposium a couple of years ago. And I think a lot of people's jaws drop. But to the extent that we can reduce risk, we will use derivatives, but on a very limited basis and take no positions.
This is a really important consideration. We will use derivatives to the extent that we need to hedge interest rates or foreign currency, but we will not invest in or speculate in derivatives. When I made the decision as to which clearing firm we would use for Global Resource Investments, later Sprott Global, we looked at 16 clearing firms, and we settled on the one that had no gross position in derivatives. Not necessarily that derivatives are a bad thing, but I couldn't understand them. And I have no interest in being a shareholder in an institution that's doing a business that I don't understand. Will BF customers, I don't know what a BF customer is, will BF customers be able to transfer IRAs to Battlebank, presuming it becomes operable?
Yes, we will be able to transfer those. And the one thing on the checkbook IRAs is you will be transferring cash over to the bank, who will become the custodian for your IRA. Underneath that IRA will help you to form an LLC or other appropriate entity that is 100% owned by the IRA. And at that point, you can open up an account. As I said, you can buy multifamily housing. You can open up an account at Schwab if that's still your inclination, or do many other things that are eligible in an IRA.
When do you expect the acquisition of Uppsala Bank to be approved?
Some time ago. We are well down the pathway here of doing this. We actually have our conditional approval from the OCC. So that's one of the two legs, and we are working with the Federal Reserve to complete their process of evaluation. So, good question. My best guess is this summer, but regulators are regulators, even in the new environment.
How will bank transfers work for foreign currency accounts if the accounts at Battle are not IBAN accounts?
Well, we have a variety of different ways we can transfer money, both directly through our own arrangements. We'll ultimately be a SWIFT member, although not on day one. There's some requirements. You have to have had a charter for a certain period of time before they'll open that up. We'll have correspondence, we'll have others, and we'll be able to move the money smoothly, no matter what you need to do.
Corporate loans, will you only be lending against precious metals deposits?
No, we have other things. One of our verticals, which is an important vertical, is lending against the revenue of well-established business-to-business software companies. We'll also look at other commercial loans. We're not going to go running around the country chasing little deals because we want to know what the heck we're doing. But we expect that many entrepreneurs will open up personal accounts at Battlebank. Often that's followed by a corporate account at Battlebank. And perhaps those individuals or those corporations have credit needs that we can evaluate. And that will also partly depend on the size of the institution at the time. Initially, where we're going to be pretty focused. Down the road, we'll begin to open that up if we agree that those credits are ones we want to take on.
Frank, I think it's important to remember the history of EverBank. You built a huge retail customer base around deposit products, and although you had mortgage expertise, your customer acquisition cost in mortgages was very low as a consequence of the fact that you already had relationships with these depositors. And our hope is that Battlebank again becomes a true community bank, and that we will look at businesses with customers that we know to be good people as a consequence of our relationship with them, and they will know us to be good people too.
And we'll be happy. We will be happy to tell people that you should go to your local bank and have a better deal. If we don't have the expertise, we're not going to BS you. We're going to let you get your deal done.
The next question has to do with the lending rate for gold, which I assume is the same as the lending rate for silver. The onset rate will be prime plus 2.5, negotiable in large transactions. Similar to having precious metals IRA, will you participate in cryptocurrency IRAs? Talk about the freedom in these checkbook IRAs.
In your checkbook IRA, you can open up crypto accounts as anything that is not ineligible in IRS speak. So if you can open up an IRA, or excuse me, if you can use crypto in a form that is acceptable to the IRS, you can do it in your IRA. It is called a checkbook IRA because it is your IRA.
Who holds the shares of the equity investors?
Well, Rick owns a lot of shares. I think the question probably might relate to the transfer agent. We're using Carta, which is an excellent online transfer agent and equity management system.
Who has first precedence in a bad scenario, depositors or investors?
That's depositors. That's easy.
If I hold Swiss francs, is there similar interest rates as holding US dollars?
I don't know the Swiss retail market off the top of my head, but what we do with our money market deposit accounts in our 18 different currencies is mimic the local deposit rates in each country. As you know, a number of those went negative over a certain period of time in the last 10 years. But if it's positive, we'll be paying interest.
Does Battlebank consider the Great Taking as a potential threat? If so, are there ways to protect the depositors?
It isn't my first concern. I know it's a concern of many people in this community, and we will do whatever we can to avoid any entanglement in that.
It's important to know that your first line of defense is a sound institution. An institution that isn't involved in time spreads, an institution that isn't involved in bad underwriting, has much less chance of a bail-in. It's important to note that your first line of defense is the institution itself. I think that's important. Apart from the current convertible offering, will there be later offerings made to accredited investors? The answer is yes, but Frank, perhaps you can talk about the fact that we will likely, to support our growth, be looking for more equity participations by our existing customers.
Absolutely, and we've also informed our regulators that we expect to be serial issuers of additional capital. Again, just looking simply at our wait list, 17,000 is growing actually very rapidly over the last couple of weeks, as we've talked about this some more. Yes, we're going to be issuing additional money down the road. I don't know when. I don't know if it's going to be this year or down the road. And some of those will be, of course, to institutional type investors in larger chunks, but certainly would hope to have, as a philosophy, depositors and investors walking hand in hand.
Yeah, I want to talk to this. I think our deposit growth is going to be extremely rapid. And I think that we'll need to add equity to handle the deposit growth. I also believe that the market value of Battlebank shares will grow as a function of our growth, to the extent that we grow 2 or 3 times as fast, at least in terms of assets under management, as competitive institutions. My suspicion is that our valuations will reflect the success that we have first in deposit growth and then in the precious metals lending portfolio. So my suspicion is that we will be serial issuers. My hope and my belief is that we will be issuing at higher and higher multiples as we grow the value of the bank. And I suspect that the first 3 years we'll see really dramatic growth in the bank. Next question, can you explain the relationship between Battlebank and Kitco? Will it occur?
Great question. I do text with Bart Gittner, owns Kitco, a number of times. First of all, he was after me when the St. Louis Blues dropped out of the playoffs, and of course, I commiserated with him when the Montreal Canadiens were eliminated. We don't have a current relationship with Bart, but he is definitely on our list to talk to.
Kitco is, of course, an important precious metals dealer, and we'd like relationships with all of the important precious metals dealers. There is nobody who offers precious metals lending as efficiently or cheaply as us. Makes absolute sense that we would be able to do business with Kitco, particularly since both of us go back with Bart Gittner 3 decades. Will the bank have a service to purchase precious metals with a recurring purchase plan, i.e., $500 or $1,000 per month?
I think that'll be up actually at day one. We did that at Everbank. I know it's on the project list of the software development team, but I believe it'll be complete on day one.
This was a very important business for Everbank. It's important to
Yep.
note, and this will be an important business for us. We have serviced the precious metals community, Frank and I, for 4 decades each. In order to be the bank of choice for the precious metals community, we will need to service as many different needs in that community as we can. The purchase and storage of precious metals, the delivery of precious metals, the transfer of precious metals is something that will be part of our DNA. We won't require that you transact with Battlebank, but we will certainly be available to transact with. If you transact with approved dealers, we will certainly lend you money against that inventory, but we will be dealers ourselves. Can an EU customer open a bank account with your bank?
Initially, no. It's a different regulatory environment that we don't have the staff to take care of out of the gate. We certainly opened EU accounts and other accounts globally at Everbank. And once we get up and running and take care of our first 17,000 friends and neighbors, we'll start looking at how we can do that.
Are there minimum deposits for specific instruments and commodities?
Nominal in any case. It's across the board. I think off the top of my head, I think foreign currency deposits are $2,500. You can make a zero deposit in your high yield checking account, although we would recommend a much larger number. The precious metals, I suspect you can buy 1 coin. I'll prefer it not be a 10th ounce, but it's okay.
The next question is, what is the current valuation of Battlebank? That's under discussion with cornerstone investors. The last round was done at $550 a share. The next round will be priced by a price-making investor. What level of deposits do you anticipate needing to generate a competitive return on capital employed?
I think, as we approach $1 billion, we begin to scale. And in our initial look at our projections, and the only thing we know about projections is something will be different. But in our initial look at projections, we're starting to hit the low teens return on equity. Again, never guaranteed, but these are projections at about $1 billion, and it goes up from there. We anticipate, given our low cost of acquisition, our low cost of delivery, and our product mix, that we should be in the high teens, somewhere in the $3 to $5 billion range.
What is the benefit of being an early accredited investor in Battlebank? Maybe I'll take that. If we exhibit the growth that I think that we can exhibit in deposits, and if we exhibit the efficiency in non-interest expense, and the efficiency in customer acquisition, the market will notice. If you fund our initial growth and other people come to invest in it after it's occurred, they may expect to receive a premium. If we're unsuccessful, of course, that premium won't occur. I think it's instructive to understand that when Frank opened Everbank, pardon me, the technology didn't exist. They had to create it, and there was no customer backlog. Everbank grew partly as a consequence of a relationship with Agora Publishing, The difference between then and now is that in those days, Agora were friends, but now they're owners. Those people own a fair bit of Battlebank. And in addition, we start life with a backlog of 17,000 interested people. If our deposit growth is anything like I imagine our deposit growth would be, and particularly if our deposit growth is concomitant with loan growth in the precious metals lending business, the market will see that and understand.
And I think there was sort of put that together with a previous question. Yes, we plan to have offerings for accredited investors down the road, but there's no guarantee that we'll be able to do that, because if we have several institutional investors come in, that might eat up the capital for several valuation rounds. So this is an opportunity to get in at the beginning. Join us in the launch of Battle Financial Building Battlebank.
Okay, guys, that's all we have time for today. You want to summarize, Rick, what we did today?
I think I'd rather let Frank summarize it. I think we taught people about the economics of banking from a bank perspective and from a customer perspective. We talked about how our institution is different than other institutions. And I hope we explained the benefits of becoming a Battlebank owner, in addition to being a depositor and or a borrower. But Frank, I'll let you wrap it up. It's your bank.
I'll reflect everything that Rick just said. We are excited to get into business. We would be delighted to have every one of you, if you're an accredited investor, join us as a shareholder. And I think we're very excited to return to this market with what we think is going to be an excellent offering for our community of like-minded individuals. And let's build this Battlebank and revolutionize banking.
I would only offer up further that to the extent that people are interested in exploring investment further, that Frank or I, or Frank and I, are available to have telephonic or Zoom conversations around that. And I also look forward in Frank's company to visiting with many of you in person at the Rural Natural Resources Investment Symposium, July 7th through 11 in Boca Raton, or if you can't come to Boca Raton, to talk with you online at the live stream presentation at the Natural Resources Investment Symposium. Battlebank will have a virtual booth there, and we're happy to talk to you there, or we're happy to talk to you before or after the conference telephonically, either jointly or together.
Looking forward to that.